Hi, I'm Gerald Jones. I'm an Ainsley native, and I'm the executive director of Renew Birmingham. I was born right on the end of the Civil Rights Movement in 1967, but my family came up from Camden and Opelika, out of slavery through Jim Crow into Birmingham, to get opportunity. Really, it was a steel town and it was booming. I ended up just getting involved in the criminal lifestyle, going to prison for armed robbery in 1987, and getting out in 1990 after another brief stint with an escape from a work release center. I just basically walked away. They told me not to leave. I left anyway. And then in 1992, things got a little more eventful. I committed a homicide and was sentenced to life in prison. And through a series of miracles, I ended up out of prison about 10 years ago and just recently was pardoned. But when I got out of prison in 2012, all the things that I learned about building community while I was in prison, and I know that sounds crazy for the average person. How do you build, community? Well, community is made of people, and you can build a healthy community or an unhealthy community, depending on the willingness of the people. But it doesn't really matter where they start. It's about the principles that really are just human. There doesn't have to be any science about it. Human beings need other human beings, and whether they're in prison or out of prison, that's going to be true. Whether they know it or not, that is going to be true. So I started learning about myself while I was in prison and using that knowledge to help other people who were going to get out. I think the probably critical thing for me was turning myself in, although I wasn't being sought after. When I committed the homicide, it was so life-changing for me, that traumatic, really. I tell people that that's where I met God at, right after committing a homicide and feeling the guilt and the shame, and wanted to know why I was really as messed up and wanted to know if God could help me. So when I turned myself in, the study of psychology and history and religion, all those things went into me learning how to function like a healthy human being. And the healthier I got, even though I was in prison and knew that I was going to die in prison, I felt like, that health was for the people who would get out, that I was supposed to share what I had understood, learn to understand. Renew Birmingham is a collective impact model. It's I call it a collective impact resource organization. Renew Birmingham's goal is to empower indigenous people in underserved communities to get invested in their own revitalization and not wait on government to come do something for them or others to come solve their problems. We believe that the power is in the hands of the citizenry. The greatest commandment, the Bible says that the greatest commandment is that you love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. But here's the thing about that. The very next line is that, and the second, when Jesus is talking about, what is most important to God, he says, and the second is like unto it, which I really believe that people miss. It is saying that it is the same. When it says like unto, it is the same. Loving God and loving your neighbor is the same thing. You cannot love God without loving your neighbor. And you cannot love your neighbor adequately without loving God. Now, that's a Gerrelism, but I just don't believe that, you can. The gospel seems to be centered around this idea. If you love God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength, then you will love your neighbor like you love yourself. It's just a natural outflow of that, and one proves the other. So that's what we want to do. We come in and not only provide the hard services that everybody else is, doing or other organizations are doing. We're talking about housing opportunities, adult education, workforce development, youth services and education, jobs and transportation, and what we call community health and wellness, which is the wraparound that includes mental health services and medical services. Those things are absolutely necessary. What we infuse those things with is a template for putting the neighbor back in neighborhood, and it calls for existing neighbor engagement, new neighbor integration, youth services, and what we call proximity investment, which gives the residents an opportunity to own the properties around them. The fact that people don't talk to each